From the moment I could grasp the concept of responsibility, it was ingrained in me that hard work was the cornerstone of life. My name is Maria, and at 28, I prided myself on being self-sufficient and financially disciplined, qualities that set me apart in my family. My upbringing wasn't marked by excessive wealth or desperate poverty. Instead, it was built on careful budgeting, countless sacrifices, and an unshakable belief that family meant everything. Growing up, my parents, Linda and Mark, were strict but loving. They instilled in me the value of saving for the future. "Rainy days come for everyone," my dad would say, patting my shoulder as I deposited half my allowance into my first savings account at the age of 10. I idolized my parents, believing they always knew what was best for me. But alongside this picture of responsibility came my younger brother, Danny, a hurricane of poor decisions wrapped in a charming grin. Danny had always been the golden boy, the one who could light up a room with his jokes and charm his way out of any trouble. And trouble was something he was intimately familiar with: late-night parties, expensive tastes, and a gambling habit that seemed harmless until it wasn't. Danny's life was a roller coaster, and my parents were the ones strapped in for the ride. For years, I watched my parents bend over backward to clean up Danny's messes. When he flunked out of college after the first year, my parents told everyone he had decided to pursue entrepreneurial ventures. When his car got repossessed, they scraped together the money to bail him out. And when he fell behind on rent for his luxury apartment, they handed him a check without hesitation. "He just needs some guidance," Mom would insist, as if throwing money at his problems counted as mentoring. Meanwhile, I worked tirelessly to build a life for myself. After graduating with honors, I landed a decent job at a marketing firm, and I poured every spare cent into my savings. Vacations and shopping sprees were luxuries I couldn't justify. My dream was to one day buy a modest home, free of debt, where I could carve out my own peace. Watching my balance grow brought a sense of pride I couldn't put into words. Family gatherings often reminded me of how different Danny and I were. While he'd regale everyone with stories about his latest escapades, I'd quietly smile, unsure whether I envied his carefree lifestyle or pitied it. Conversations would inevitably shift to Danny's potential and my parents' unwavering belief that he was destined for greatness. I learned to suppress my frustration, reassuring myself that my hard work would pay off in ways Danny's charm never could. Despite the favoritism, I never questioned my parents' love or intentions. They were my role models, my guiding stars. I believed that they saw my diligence and were proud of me, even if they rarely expressed it. The blind faith I placed in them extended beyond emotions. It was practical too. When I set up my savings account, I named Mom as a co-signer. It felt natural. She was my mother, my trusted confidant. What harm could there be in that? That trust became a bedrock of my life. I trusted my parents to support me emotionally, even when Danny's drama dominated their attention. I trusted them to recognize my sacrifices, even as they funneled resources into patching up his latest crises. And above all, I trusted them to respect the boundaries I had carefully established around my financial independence. But trust is a fragile thing, built on years of belief yet capable of shattering in a single moment. It wasn't until the day I checked my bank account, expecting to see the steady sum I had saved over years of discipline and self-denial, that I realized the foundation I had built my faith upon was little more than sand. It started as a typical Monday morning. I was sitting at my kitchen table, sipping coffee and scrolling through my emails. On a whim, I decided to check my bank account. It had become a comforting ritual of sorts, a little reminder that all my hard work was adding up, that the sacrifices were worth it. As the app loaded, I mentally calculated how much should be there: nearly $30,000. Years of skipped vacations, packed lunches, and extra freelance gigs had grown that account into a safety net I could be proud of. My dreams of a down payment on a modest home were finally within reach. The screen lit up, and at first I thought there had been a mistake. My balance wasn't anywhere near $30,000. It was just under $200. I froze, staring at the number as if willing it to change. Surely it was a glitch. Maybe the app was malfunctioning? I refreshed the page. Same number. My throat tightened as dread crept in. Quickly, I navigated to my transaction history, scrolling frantically for an explanation. There it was, a single withdrawal for nearly $28,000. The recipient? A name I recognized immediately. Danny. My stomach dropped. My mind scrambled to make sense of it. Why would Danny have access to my account? I had never shared my details with anyone except my mother, who I had co-signed on the account years ago. My hands shook as I called her. The phone rang twice before she picked up, her voice cheerful. "Hi, sweetheart. How are you?" "Mom," I said, my voice tight, "did you or Dad withdraw money from my savings account?" There was a pause, long enough to set my nerves on edge. Finally, she sighed. "Yes, honey, we had to." My heart hammered in my chest. "You had to? What do you mean? That money was for my house. Why would you touch it without asking me?" "Maria, calm down," she said in a tone that only made my anger rise. "Danny needed help. He got into a little trouble again, and we couldn't just leave him stranded. He's family." "A little trouble?" I echoed, my voice rising. "You mean you drained almost all of my savings to bail him out? Do you even understand how long it took me to save that money?" "Honey," she began, but her voice had shifted, less apologetic, more defensive. "Danny's been going through a lot. He's your brother. You don't know what it's like to be in his shoes. You've always been stable, responsible. You'll bounce back." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My blood boiled as I tried to comprehend how she could say something so dismissive. "Stable? Responsible? That doesn't mean you get to steal from me, Mom. You didn't even ask." "It's not stealing," she snapped, her tone icy now. "We're your parents. We've done everything for you, Maria. A little gratitude wouldn't hurt." "Gratitude?" I repeated, stunned. "For what? For teaching me that I can't trust my own family? For deciding that Danny's screw-ups are more important than my future?" She huffed, clearly done with the conversation. "You're being dramatic. It's just money. You'll earn it back. Now stop acting like a child." The call ended abruptly, leaving me sitting in stunned silence. I stared at my phone, my mind racing. "It's just money," she'd said, as if my years of hard work and sacrifice were meaningless. My phone buzzed with a text from Danny. "Thanks for understanding, sis. You're the best." I felt my chest tighten, a mix of fury and betrayal surging through me. Understanding? I didn't even know the full story, and already I was expected to roll over and accept it. That night, as I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, a grim resolve took root. I had always believed that family came first, that you could lean on your loved ones without fear of being taken advantage of. But my trust had been shattered. I wasn't going to let this go. The days following my discovery of the drained savings account were a whirlwind of emotions, disbelief, anger, and heartbreak tangled together in an unrelenting storm. I couldn't focus at work, and every time I closed my eyes, I saw Danny's smug text message thanking me for understanding. It wasn't just the money that hurt, it was the betrayal. I had trusted my parents implicitly, believing they'd respect the boundaries I'd worked so hard to establish. And yet, they'd taken what wasn't theirs, dismissed my feelings, and even had the audacity to justify it. I couldn't let it slide. The first step was to find out the full story. If my parents weren't going to be forthcoming, I'd figure it out myself. I combed through the account records, documenting every detail of the withdrawal, the date, the amount, and the reference to Danny's name. Then I called Danny. "Hey, Maria!" he answered cheerfully, as if nothing had happened. "Danny," I said, keeping my voice cold, "I want to know exactly what my money was used for." There was a pause, and I heard him exhale loudly. "Oh, come on, Maria. Why are you making this a big deal? Mom and Dad already explained it. I needed help, and they figured you wouldn't mind." "Mind?" I snapped. "Of course I mind, Danny. It's not their money to give. What did you do this time? Another gambling spree? Not exactly, he muttered, and I could hear the guilt creeping into his voice. It's just, I owed some people. Things got a little out of control, and they were threatening to, you know, show up at Mom and Dad's house. They didn't want me in trouble. My stomach churned. You put them in danger, and their solution was to sacrifice my future instead? It's not like that, Danny protested. They're helping family. You know how it works. You'd do the same for me. No, I wouldn't, I said, my voice like ice. Not like this. Not without asking. Danny sighed dramatically. Fine, I'll pay you back. Happy now? I almost laughed at the absurdity. With what money, Danny? You can't even keep your own accounts out of the red. He didn't answer, and I hung up before the rage bubbling in my chest boiled over. Later that week, I confronted my parents in person. I'd asked them to meet me at my apartment, determined to have the conversation on my turf instead of theirs. Mom sat on my couch, arms crossed, looking irritated. Dad fidgeted beside her, avoiding my gaze. Maria, this is getting ridiculous, Mom started. You're making such a fuss over a small family matter. We've apologized. Let's move on. Apologized? I said, incredulous. You haven't even acknowledged what you did was wrong. You stole from me. You treated me like a backup plan for Danny's mistakes. We didn't steal, Mom snapped. We're your parents. We've always provided for you. You wouldn't have had any savings to begin with if it weren't for us. That doesn't give you the right to take it, I shot back. You're not entitled to my money, no matter how much you justify it in your head. Dad finally spoke, his voice low and hesitant. We thought you'd understand, Maria. Danny needed help, and we were out of options. You were out of options because you've bailed him out so many times, I said, my voice rising. You've enabled him his entire life, and now you're asking me to do the same? We're not asking you to do anything, Mom said, her tone dismissive. It's done. He's your brother. You'll forgive him eventually. I stared at them, my chest heaving with anger. Do you hear yourselves? You didn't even think to ask me before taking everything I've worked for. How can you expect me to forgive that? Dad rubbed his temples, clearly worn down. We'll figure out a way to pay you back, okay? It'll take time, but we'll make it right. I could feel my throat tighten as tears threatened to fall, but I refused to show weakness. It's not just about the money, I said quietly. It's about trust. And right now, I don't trust either of you. Mom stood abruptly, grabbing her purse. If you're going to act like this, then maybe we shouldn't have come. We've done everything for you, Maria. Everything. And this is how you repay us? Leave, I said, my voice trembling with barely contained rage. Just go. They left without another word, and I collapsed onto the couch, the weight of their betrayal pressing down on me. Over the next few days, I began researching my legal options. I had no idea if I could even file a case against my parents, but I was determined to try. The more I dug, the clearer it became. What they had done qualified as misappropriation of funds. They had abused their position as co-signers on my account, and there were laws in place to protect against that. I scheduled a consultation with a lawyer, a sharp woman named Patricia, who listened intently as I explained the situation. This is a tough one emotionally, she said, her eyes kind but serious. You're dealing with family, which complicates everything. But legally, you have a strong case. The withdrawal was unauthorized, and you have the documentation to prove it. And if I file a case? I asked, my voice uncertain. Patricia leaned forward. If you win, you'll likely be awarded damages and restitution. But this will strain your relationship with your parents. Are you ready for that? I hesitated, the question weighing heavily on me. Was I ready to become the villain in my own family's narrative? To stand up to the people who had raised me, even if it meant severing ties? I thought of Danny's smirk, Mom's dismissive tone, and Dad's excuses. And then I thought of everything I'd worked for, my dreams, my independence, my future. I am, I said finally. Patricia nodded. Then let's get started. The courtroom was colder than I expected, both physically and emotionally. The fluorescent lights cast a harsh glare on the polished wooden benches and tables. I sat at the plaintiff's table beside Patricia, my lawyer, who exuded calm confidence as we prepared for what would be one of the hardest days of my life. Across the aisle sat my parents, looking distinctly uncomfortable. Mom's jaw was set in defiance, while Dad avoided eye contact entirely. Danny wasn't there. Of course he wasn't. He never showed up when things got hard. The judge entered, and everyone rose. As proceedings began, I felt a swell of anxiety in my chest. This wasn't just a courtroom, it was a battlefield, and on the other side were the people who had brought me into this world. Patricia opened with a clear and compelling statement. She explained how my parents had accessed my savings account without my consent, misappropriating nearly $28,000 of my hard-earned money. She emphasized that this wasn't about family drama, it was about justice and boundaries. When Mom and Dad's lawyer spoke, he leaned heavily into the family angle, painting me as an ungrateful daughter. Maria's parents acted out of love and concern for their son Danny. They never intended to harm her or cause her distress. Surely this can be resolved without such harsh legal measures. I clenched my fists under the table. Love and concern. Is that what they call draining my account without so much as a conversation? The judge's neutral expression gave nothing away, but Patricia gave me a reassuring nod. "We've got this," she whispered. The first witnesses were called, starting with me. Patricia led me through a detailed recounting of the events. I described how I'd discovered the missing money, the confrontation with my parents, and their dismissive response. "What were your savings intended for?" Patricia asked, her voice steady and clear. "A down payment on a house," I said. "I've been saving for years, sacrificing vacations and luxuries so I could afford something of my own." My voice cracked slightly, but I pressed on. That money represented my future, and they took it without asking. When their lawyer cross-examined me, his tone was pointed but polite. "Maria, wouldn't you agree that family comes first?" "Not when it means betraying someone's trust," I replied firmly. "And your brother, do you not care about his well-being?" "I care about Danny," I said, my voice hardening. "But caring about him doesn't mean enabling his reckless behavior, and it certainly doesn't mean sacrificing my own future to clean up his messes." Next came my parents. Mom took the stand first, her demeanor defensive. She painted a picture of a family in crisis, with Danny facing threats from dangerous people. "We did what we thought was right," she said, her voice tinged with indignation. "Danny needed help. We assumed Maria would understand." Patricia's questions were surgical. "Did you ask Maria for permission before withdrawing the money?" Mom shifted uncomfortably. "No, but—" Patricia cut her off. "So you admit the withdrawal was unauthorized?" Mom's lips thinned into a line. "We didn't think she'd mind." "Why didn't you use your own money to help Danny?" Patricia pressed. "We didn't have that kind of money," Mom admitted, her tone growing defensive again. "So instead of finding another solution, you decided to take from your daughter's savings without her consent?" The courtroom was silent as my mother struggled to answer. Dad's testimony was less combative but equally damning. He admitted that they had knowingly accessed my account and that they had no concrete plan to pay me back. "I thought we could figure it out later," he said, his voice low. "We didn't think Maria would take it this far." Patricia pounced. "Do you believe it's reasonable to assume that someone would be okay with having nearly $28,000 taken from their account without warning?" Dad hesitated, his shoulders slumping. "No," he admitted finally. As the day wore on, the judge asked clarifying questions, and I could see her weighing the evidence carefully. When Patricia delivered her closing arguments, she was both passionate and precise. "This case isn't about punishing parents for loving their child," she said. "It's about recognizing that love doesn't excuse betrayal. Maria worked hard to save for her future, and her parents took that future away without her consent. This is not just a family matter, it's a legal violation." My parents' lawyer tried to appeal to the judge's sense of compassion, arguing that this was a misunderstanding, not a crime. But even he seemed to sense the futility of his position. When the judge finally delivered her ruling, the air in the courtroom felt electric. "I find in favor of the plaintiff," she said, her voice firm. "The withdrawal was unauthorized, and the defendant's actions constitute misappropriation of funds. The defendants are ordered to repay the full amount of $28,000 plus additional damages for emotional distress." A wave of relief washed over me, but it was tinged with sadness. I had won, but the victory came at a cost. As I left the courtroom, I saw my parents sitting together, their faces a mix of anger and defeat. They didn't look at me as I walked past them. Outside, Patricia turned to me with a small smile. "You did the right thing, Maria." I nodded, though my heart felt heavy. The right thing didn't always feel good. The weeks following the court ruling were a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. On paper, I had won. My parents were ordered to repay the money they had taken, and I could finally begin rebuilding the life I had so carefully planned. But in my heart, the victory felt hollow. The first repayment arrived in the mail, a bank check for a fraction of the total amount. Attached was a handwritten note from my father. "Maria, we're sorry things came to this. Please give us time to make things right. Dad." I read the note a dozen times, searching for something genuine in his words. Was he truly remorseful? Or was this just another attempt to smooth things over without confronting the reality of what they'd done? I didn't respond. Danny, of course, remained silent. Not a text, not a call, not even a half-hearted apology. It was as though he'd written himself out of the story entirely, leaving Mom and Dad to bear the weight of his mistakes. I couldn't say I was surprised. The fallout from the lawsuit rippled through the family. Relatives called me, some to offer support, others to criticize me for dragging our family's dirty laundry into court. "I can't believe you did this to your parents," my Aunt Karen said during one particularly heated phone call. "They've done so much for you." "They betrayed me," I replied evenly. "And if you think that's acceptable, maybe you should offer them your savings next time Danny screws up." The line went silent, and I hung up, feeling both vindicated and exhausted. Amid the chaos, I focused on moving forward. With the partial repayment, I started the long process of rebuilding my savings. I picked up extra freelance projects, cut back on unnecessary expenses, and forced myself to see this as an opportunity to prove my resilience. The bitterness began to fade, replaced by a steely determination. I wasn't going to let their betrayal define me. Months passed before I saw my parents again. They showed up unannounced one Saturday afternoon, standing awkwardly on my doorstep. Mom looked deflated, the sharpness in her eyes replaced with something softer. Dad fidgeted nervously beside her, holding another check. "Hi, Maria," Mom said, her voice hesitant. "Can we come in?" I hesitated but stepped aside, motioning for them to sit on the couch. "We wanted to talk," Dad began, placing the check on the coffee table. "And to say we're sorry, truly sorry for what we did. It was wrong, and we see that now." Mom nodded, her eyes glistening. "We should have respected you, Maria. We were desperate, but that's no excuse. We've been trying to figure out how to fix things, but we know it'll take more than just money." Their words caught me off guard. For the first time, I saw a glimpse of the parents I had once trusted implicitly, but trust wasn't something that could be rebuilt in a single conversation. "I appreciate the apology," I said carefully, "but this isn't just about the money. You broke my trust, and I don't know how to get that back." Mom looked down, wiping her eyes. "We understand, and we'll do whatever it takes to prove we can change." The conversation ended on a tentative note. I wasn't ready to forgive them entirely, but their willingness to take responsibility felt like a step in the right direction. In the months that followed, I focused on myself. I bought a small condo, modest, but mine, using what I had managed to save and what they had repaid. It wasn't the dream home I had envisioned, but it was a start. I set boundaries with my parents, keeping our interactions polite but distant. Danny remained a ghost, his absence serving as a reminder of why I had chosen to stand up for myself in the first place. One evening, as I sat in my new living room, surrounded by the quiet hum of my own space, I felt a sense of peace. I had weathered the storm, and though the scars were still there, they no longer felt like weights pulling me down. I had fought for myself, and for the first time in a long time, I felt whole. 3 years later, I was walking through the farmer's market near my condo when I spotted Danny. He looked different, older, more worn. He hesitated when he saw me, but eventually approached, hands shoved deep into his pockets. "Hey, Maria," he said quietly. "Danny." My voice was neutral, my guard still up. I wanted to say, "I'm sorry," he said, his eyes meeting mine. "For everything, for taking your money, for letting Mom and Dad take the fall. I've been trying to get my life together. I'm working now, paying off debts." His words surprised me, but I simply nodded. "I hope you mean it, Danny, for your sake." We parted on civil terms, but as I walked away, I felt a weight lift. Closure didn't erase the pain, but it reminded me how far I'd come. Standing in my cozy kitchen later that evening, I smiled. Life wasn't perfect, but it was mine, and that was enough.